He moved into a deserted farm, but 3 stunning women were already there. Oklahoma Territory, 1883. Alex Rivers sat frozen in the saddle, dust clinging to his boots, the wind tugging at his coat. Before him stood the farmhouse, weathered, sun-bleached, quiet, supposed to be abandoned. That's what the deed said, what the man in Elgin swore. Every penny Alex had left was sunk into this patch of land. But something was wrong. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Chickens clucked behind a split-rail fence. Laundry swayed like flags of warning on a crooked line. And then the front door creaked open. 3 women stepped out. The eldest, silver hair braided back tight, held a rifle leveled at his chest. Beside her, 2 younger women mirrored her stance. "This is private property," the old woman said. "You've got until sundown to ride on." Alex raised both hands slowly. "I have the deed." She didn't flinch. "And we have the original, 20 years older." Her eyes didn't waver. In that moment Alex understood he hadn't bought land. He'd bought someone else's war. Before Oklahoma. Before the rifles and the standoff, before the land he thought he'd owned was claimed by others, Alex Rivers had lived beneath the earth. He'd been a miner in the iron-rich hills of Missouri, where the sun barely mattered and a man's world ended at the light of his lantern. He was good at it, steady with his hands, careful with his measurements. He wasn't the fastest pick in the tunnel, but he was the one others followed. The one they trusted not to panic when the walls groaned or the dust came too thick. He worked the mine for 7 years, saved most of what he earned. Had plans once, too. Not big ones, he never cared for saloons or silver watches, but simple ones. A cabin somewhere green. A dog. A woman, maybe, if she didn't mind the silence he carried like a second skin. Then the cave-in came. It was a Monday, just past noon. They'd gone deeper than usual, chasing a thick vein, the timber groaning louder each day. Alex had told the foreman, asked for another support beam. "Just one more," he said, "or we're pressing our luck." But luck was expensive, and the company man said there was no time. So down they went. The first crack sounded like thunder. The second didn't sound at all. Just a sucking silence as the roof gave way. Alex remembered the darkness most of all. The sudden loss of light as the lanterns shattered. The screams that started and stopped. The weight of the earth pressing down like a hand closing over his chest. He was pinned. Left leg crushed beneath a beam, ribs tight against the stone. Dirt filled his mouth, his ears. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He thought he would die there. Maybe he wanted to, but something in him refused. He clawed with his free hand, blind, choking, dragging himself inch by inch toward what he hoped was open air. Time bent out of shape. Minutes turned to hours. Hours to forever. When the rescuers finally found him, just one eye open, hands bloodied raw, they called him lucky. 6 men died that day. Good men. 2 had children. 1 had just bought a Bible for his mother's birthday. Alex never went back. He walked away from the mine the day he could walk again. His legs stiff, his soul heavier. The payout was small. A letter of thanks. A week's wages. A town that buried 6 and looked at the 7th like he'd crawled out of the grave too early. After that, he drifted. Across the plains. Through towns with names like Barton's Hollow, Bitter Creek, and Devil's Well. He took odd work. Mending fences, digging wells, breaking horses others called too wild. He slept in barns or under the stars. Talked to no one unless he had to. Something about people made him anxious. Their eyes, their questions. He avoided children. He couldn't bear to look at their bright eyes. They reminded him of futures he'd once imagined and now kept buried deep. He told himself he didn't need anything. Not roots, not family, not peace. But that was a lie. Even ghosts want a place to rest. He was 30 when he saw the notice. It was tacked to a cracked saloon wall in Elgin, Oklahoma, just above a pile of horse dung and under a yellowed poster advertising snake oil. Farmland for sale. 160 acres. Goodwill. Clear title. $600. The man selling it was all smiles and sweat. Said the homestead had gone empty. Said the family left during a drought. A good spot, he promised. All you need's a strong back and seed. Alex didn't ask questions. Because he wanted to believe. Because $600, everything he had left, seemed a small price for silence. He imagined it easily. A spring house, fenced field. A place where no one would come asking about cave-ins or the way he sometimes woke up screaming. So he handed over the money. No contract. Just a handshake and a rolled deed in a twine-wrapped tube. And he set out the next morning with a mule, a plow blade, and a dream he didn't dare say aloud. 2 days later, he reached the edge of the property. The grass was tall, the soil dark. He could smell the river wind in the cottonwoods. And then he saw the smoke, curling from a chimney that wasn't supposed to smoke. He saw chickens in a pen, laundry on a line, and 3 women stepping onto a porch that shouldn't have held anyone. The eldest's voice was cold as iron. This is private land. You've got until sundown to ride on. Alex hadn't come for a fight. He came for quiet, to plant beans, to build something that didn't collapse around him. But the past never lets go easy. And somehow he'd stepped into another collapse. One that didn't happen beneath the ground, but above it, where rifles were drawn and truth was buried deeper than any mine. The sun was low by the time the standoff cooled. Alex hadn't moved from the saddle. Dust clung to his boots. His hands still hovered near his waist, nowhere near his revolver. The eldest woman hadn't lowered her rifle either. Her gray braid swung gently in the wind. Finally, the younger of the 2 stepped forward, no more than 20, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much. "You're not one of theirs," she said, voice flat but not cruel. "Not dressed like a banker's man." "I'm not." "You bought the land?" Alex nodded. "Paid $600 in Elgin." The woman snorted. "Then you paid $600 to get yourself shot." The elder sighed. "Enough, Clara." She lowered her rifle, slowly, but the edge in her eyes remained. "I'm Mary Grayson. That's Clara, and the one behind her is Joan. This land has been ours since our father homesteaded it in '63. Mary looked him over, eyes pausing on the frayed sleeves of his coat. The old mule behind him, the empty seed sack strapped to the saddle. "You don't look like trouble," she said. "I'm not." "Then that makes 2 of us in the wrong place at the wrong time." Joan finally stepped forward, holding a faded paper in one hand. It was a deed curled, worn, ink fading from age. Mary pulled a copy of the same paper from inside her jacket. "This one's from '63, she said. "Ours." Alex handed over his. "Mine says 1883, signed by a Henry Bellows." "Bellows?" Mary's jaw tightened. "First Frontier Bank." Alex nodded. "That's the one." Mary exchanged glances with Clara. "They've been trying to take this place from us for 2 years. We sent letters, hired a lawyer out of Fort Supply. But then someone broke into his office, took everything. And last week," Clara added, "someone shot at Joan while she was feeding the chickens." Alex looked at the younger sister. A bruise darkened her jaw. She said nothing. "They never come themselves," Mary went on. "Just send men with paper and guns." "And you?" Clara asked. "Why'd you buy this?" Alex hesitated. "Then, to start over." Mary studied him. "Then you should ride on." He didn't answer. Not because he was looking for a fight, but because something in their faces told him leaving would be worse. He set up camp that night beside the fence line, under a cottonwood that hummed with locusts. No one invited him in. No one offered supper. But Mary brought him a bucket of water just after sundown and said nothing when he tipped his hat in thanks. At dawn, he saw Joan leading a mule toward the creek. Its left leg was bandaged, limping badly. "That animal should have been put down," he said gently. Joan jumped, startled. "I didn't hear you. Didn't mean to sneak up." She nodded and kept walking. "You need help with it?" She hesitated. "You know animals?" Alex gave the mule a look. "Well enough to tell when it's dying." Joan stopped. "It's all we've got." Alex squatted down, inspected the swollen leg. "You've been using him to pull, haven't you?" "Only when we need to." He's got a deep strain. Needs rest, not work. Joan looked toward the barn. Rest won't plant the corn. Alex stood. I've got 2 hands. I'll help. She looked at him, uncertain. Then, Mary won't allow it. Then ask her. Mary didn't answer right away. She stood in the doorway of the house, her arms folded. When Clara brought her the message, she looked across the yard at Alex. Finally, she gave a short nod. He can help, but we don't owe him anything. He's not part of this. That afternoon, Alex dug irrigation trenches until the sun set fire to the horizon. His shirt clung to his back. His hands blistered. But for the first time in years, he was working for more than just a wage. He was working for something that might be worth saving. That night, Joan brought him supper. Biscuits and beans. She didn't say much. Just set the plate down and walked back toward the porch, where Mary sat with a rifle across her knees. In the distance, a coyote called. The wind shifted, and Alex felt the shape of something changing. A week passed. Then 2. Alex helped repair the fence, hauled water, cleared brush along the southern border where the bank's men had been seen watching from a rise. The Grayson sisters said little, but they stopped flinching when he walked into a room. One evening, Clara came out of the house with a bundle of letters tied in twine. They were our mother's, she said. She vanished after father died. Went to town for medicine and never came back. Never found her? Clara shook her head. Just the cart. Burned out. She untied the bundle. Inside were deeds, handwritten letters, land receipts, and contracts. Decades old. Alex read through them slowly. His stomach turned. This one's a copy of a homestead claim, he said. Your father signed it in 1863. Here's another from 72. He bought the neighboring tract. Mary joined them at the table. That was after the railroad cut through. Everyone started buying up land. Joan brought a candle. What do you see? Alex turned one letter toward the light. This, he said, pointing to a signature at the bottom. This isn't real. Clara leaned in. What do you mean? Alex held up the letter. It's supposed to be from your father, right? But it's in the same handwriting as this other document, signed by someone named Charles Brackett. Joan frowned. He's the one who came last spring, said we owed taxes. Alex nodded. He forged this. He rifled through the bundle, setting aside each document with suspicious handwriting, looking for patterns. An hour later, the table was covered. Alex sat back, the candlelight flickering over his face. This isn't a dispute, he said. It's theft. Organized. Someone at the bank is forging deeds, reselling land, and using hired muscle to drive families out. Mary's voice was ice. Then we'll show the sheriff. Alex met her eyes. What if the sheriff already knows? No one spoke. The wind moaned through the rafters. Then Clara, voice soft. Then we show someone who isn't bought. It was just after dawn when the dust cloud appeared on the southern trail. Alex had been loading firewood near the barn when he saw it. A lone rider moving with the kind of swagger that didn't belong to a rancher or a neighbor. The horse was black, tall, restless. Its rider wore a leather coat polished with oil and sun, the butt of a revolver visible beneath one arm. He didn't slow as he approached the Grayson farm. Mary was already on the porch, rifle in hand. Clara and Joan stepped out behind her. Alex moved to stand beside them, not waiting for permission. The rider reined in just 20 yards from the house. I believe this is the Grayson property, he called out. His voice was smooth, too smooth. Name's Brackett. Charlie Brackett. I'm here on behalf of First Frontier Bank. Mary didn't flinch. We've told your kind before. Brackett held up a gloved hand. Just here for taxes, ma'am. You can pay today, or tomorrow your fence posts start walking away. Clara stiffened. Joan touched her arm. Alex stepped forward, placing himself between the sisters and Brackett. You're here by mistake, he said calmly. I've got a deed, so do they. This land's not for sale. Brackett studied him with mild amusement. You must be the new fool. Alex didn't move. Brackett leaned forward in the saddle, smile thinning. So, You both think you've got the law on your side. He reached into his coat. Too quickly. Mary raised her rifle, but Brackett only pulled out a folded paper and tossed it onto the dirt. Tax lien, he said. Signed by Judge Harland in Fort Supply. Pay it by nightfall or I bring men. He wheeled the horse around and rode off without another word. Alex picked up the paper. This isn't a lien, he muttered. It's a forgery. Same handwriting as the others. Mary didn't look away from the trail Brackett had disappeared down. They'll be back. Alex folded the paper and slipped it into his coat. Then so will we. The cellar beneath the farmhouse hadn't been touched in years. Its wooden door sagged, hinges rusted, but the air was cool, dry, and the floor untouched since their father's time. They lit lanterns, boxes, crates, dust, mice skittering in corners. Joan opened a trunk under a moldy quilt and gasped. Inside were dozens of papers. Letters bundled with twine, property maps, tax receipts, and stamped envelopes dated back 2 decades. Their father's ledger, brittle and yellowed, listed crop yields and loans, including the last payment he'd made to the First Frontier Bank. Clara found an envelope labeled, Lawsuit, 1874. Inside was a letter signed by a Judge McCready. He ruled in favor of our father, she said, reading aloud. Said the land was fully paid and protected from sale. Joan pointed to another line, and that the bank's attempt to seize it was criminal. Mary looked at Alex. Proof. He nodded slowly. More than proof. A pattern. They worked until the candles burned low. Alex matched handwriting, signatures, dates. With each connection, the outline sharpened. A scheme by the bank to reclaim land through false liens and phantom tax debts. Pushing families off homesteads, then reselling the land to desperate newcomers like him. Mary held up a letter. This one's from a man named Jonathan Kessler. Alex froze. I've heard that name. He was in Elgin when I bought the land. Bank manager? Worse. He signs the deeds. Might be the one forging them. Mary rolled up the bundle of documents. We take it to the sheriff. No, Alex said. We go higher. If the sheriff's bought, he'll burn this before it sees daylight. We need the U.S. Marshal. Clara blinked. How? I'll ride to Fort Supply. You stay here and guard this. If they show up before I'm back. Mary cocked the rifle. We'll manage. But Joan stepped forward. No, I'll go. Mary started to protest, but Joan shook her head. You're the strongest shot. Clara knows the papers better. And Alex can hold a line if it comes to that. I'm the one they'll ignore. Alex looked at her. They won't ignore you if they think you're alone. I won't be, she said softly, and gestured to her saddlebag. I know the back trails. I can be in Fort Supply by nightfall. She packed food and water. Alex helped her mount. Before she left, Mary placed a folded letter in her hand. Give this to Marshal Davidson. Tell him to come armed. Joan nodded and rode off without looking back. The rest of the day passed like thunder with no storm. Alex patrolled the fence line, rifle slung over one shoulder. Mary watched the southern trail through a spyglass. Clara worked in the barn, bundling the papers into oilskin wraps. By sunset, the wind turned. Dogs barked in the hills, and Alex knew Brackett would not return alone. Not this time. He loaded his revolver. Then he turned to Mary and said quietly, Let's be ready. The sky was wrong. Cloudless, too bright, with a sun that scorched but didn't move. The wind shifted through brittle grass, carrying a tension sharper than heat. From the ridge beyond the southern field came a sound that didn't belong. Not thunder, not wind. It was hooves. Many. Alex Rivers stood at the fence line, hands resting on the top rail, jaw clenched. He counted 30 riders before the dust swallowed them. Behind him, the Grayson farmhouse creaked as if it too was watching. Inside, wood had been nailed across the windows, rifles cleaned and loaded, buckets of water set in corners. The scent of old smoke lingered from the stove, mingling with gun oil. Mary Grayson stepped beside Alex. Her sleeves were rolled, her fingers dark with powder from shell handling. She raised her spyglass and scanned the southern rise. Brackets there, she said. Middle rider. And she adjusted the lens. Someone new. Black coat, polished boots, white gelding. Alex exhaled through his nose. Kessler. From the loft, Clara's voice cut through the thick air. They're fanning out. 4 to the creek bed. 6 more heading left. That's not a visit. That's formation. Alex nodded. They're closing the trap, Mary murmured. Inside the house, Joan Grayson was laying ammunition on the table in rows. Careful, methodical, like placing holy objects on an altar. She didn't speak. She just worked. Mary turned from the glass. We stand. Alex didn't move his eyes from the trail. We stand. The sound of hooves drew closer. A steady, rhythmic pulse that stirred dust into rising walls. The first horse cleared the ridge fully. Then another. Then another. They came with the confidence of men who expected surrender. They didn't hide behind masks. They wanted to be recognized. At the head rode Charlie Brackett, leather coat flapping like loose skin on a dying beast. His face carried a half-grin, half-snarl. Familiar now, like the smell of a bad storm. Beside him was the man in black, Jonathan Kessler. He sat like a judge in a courtroom he built himself. They passed the creek without slowing, rode over the fence line as if it didn't exist, came to a halt in the middle of the yard. Brackett raised his hand. Morning. Mary didn't respond. Her rifle was already at her shoulder. Kessler dismounted. His boots barely sank in the dust. He looked at the farmhouse, the scorched barn, the heavy silence. Then his eyes found Alex. Mr. Rivers, he said with polite venom. Still here. Alex didn't move. You were given notice, Kessler continued. You were compensated. You refused both reason and mercy. Mary spoke from the porch. He was sold stolen land. And we were born on it, Joan added from the doorway. Clara descended from the loft with the oilskin bundle in her hand. We have every deed, every letter, every lie you buried. Kessler tilted his head. Then you're prepared to die for paper. No, Alex said. We're prepared to live for truth. Kessler's smile didn't reach his eyes. He turned to Brackett. Proceed. Brackett didn't shout. He just raised his rifle, and the yard exploded into chaos. The first shot ripped through a fence post, sending splinters into the air. Then came the torches, arcs of fire hurled from riders as they galloped around the edge of the property. One landed on the barn roof, shattering in flame. Another struck the dry grass near the woodpile. Within seconds, smoke bloomed. Alex dropped behind a trough and fired back, hitting a man square in the chest. He didn't wait to see him fall. Already another was riding low around the well, firing blindly toward the porch. From the upper window, Joan answered with a blast from her shotgun. It echoed across the yard like thunder cracking in a canyon. A rider tumbled, his horse rearing and screaming. Right flank, Clara shouted from the loft. They're coming hard on the east side. Mary pivoted on the porch, rifle braced against the frame. She fired once, reloaded, fired again. Each shot measured, each placed. Inside, the house rang with motion. Wood creaked, boots slammed against floorboards. Voices shouted orders not in panic but in rhythm. Alex sprinted across the yard, low and fast, reaching the barn just as a second torch ignited a stack of dry feed. He hurled a bucket of water onto it, but it hissed uselessly. We need more water, he shouted. Clara slid down the ladder, rifle slung, sweat streaking her face. The well's covered. 3 riders took position there. I couldn't get close. Behind the house, a rider galloped toward the side door. Joan opened it just enough to fire once, then slammed it shut as he toppled. Clara, Mary shouted. The papers. You've got to run. Clara hesitated. They'll burn everything if they can't steal it, Mary yelled. Alex met Clara's eyes. Creek bed, North Trail. Ride like hell. Clara nodded, shoved the bundle inside her coat, and ran. Fast, head down, ducking smoke. She reached the corral, climbed the rail, and mounted the black mare they'd kept hidden. With a snap of reins, she vanished behind the barn. Brackett saw her. "She's got M," he shouted. "After her." Two men wheeled their horses and gave chase. Alex fired at the lead. The shot missed. He fired again. The second rider dropped. The first kept going, dirt spraying under his hooves. Alex turned to the well and sprinted toward the fence, ducking behind the feed wagon. One of the men guarding the water spotted him too late. Alex shot him through the ribs, then grabbed the man's rifle and flung it into the brush. Smoke billowed behind him. The barn creaked, its roof catching fully now. "Back door!" Mary yelled. "They're at the kitchen." Alex ran, climbing onto the porch, ducking just as a shot took off the edge of the eaves. He kicked the door open and slid in, eyes sweeping the hallway. Joan handed him more cartridges. "Clara?" "Gone. One chased. One down." Mary reloaded beside the stair. "Kessler's still out there. Watching. Not moving." Joan's face was gray with sweat. "Why doesn't he run?" Alex leaned against the wall, chest heaving. "Because he doesn't believe he's losing." And maybe he wasn't. The barn was nearly gone. The porch was shot through. Half the yard was smoke and ash. But the house still stood. And Clara was gone, carrying the one thing they couldn't afford to lose. And then came the shift. A whistle, sharp, piercing. The riders began pulling back, one by one. At first Alex thought it was a trick. The whistle had pierced the roar. A sharp, hawk-like cry that carried over the smoke and gunfire. But no new men rode in. No gunshots followed. Instead, the riders began to withdraw, not in panic, but in formation. A slow turn of bodies and reins, gathering their wounded, dragging the fallen. Brackett limped toward his horse, one leg soaked with blood. He swore through gritted teeth, tried to mount, failed. Two men helped him up. Joan stood in the window, rifle still ready. "They're retreating." "They're not beaten," Mary said beside her. "Just burned." Alex stepped out onto the porch, rifle lowered but still in his hands. His shirt clung to him, soaked through with sweat and soot. The fire at the barn had eaten itself down to embers, and now only ash rose into the orange light of evening. He saw Kessler then, still mounted, still untouched. He had not fired a single shot, had not raised his voice, yet his presence had clung to every moment, as if this had all been a script he'd written long ago. Now he sat his white gelding like a statue of authority, watching the broken yard, the wounded men, the defiant house that refused to fall. Alex stepped forward. Kessler's eyes locked on him. "This isn't over," Kessler said, calm as ever. "No," Alex replied. "It's finally begun." Kessler blinked, slowly, like a man weighing threats against risks. Then, without another word, he turned his horse and rode away. Brackett followed, held steady by the man beside him. They vanished beyond the hill, into a dusk that swallowed shadows. And then came the quiet. Not peace, not yet, but the stillness after the fury. Smoke curled upward. The wind shifted. The chickens had scattered. The well was cracked. The barn lay in ruin. But the house stood. Mary sat on the porch steps, rifle across her lap. Joan joined her, hand resting on her sister's shoulder. Inside, the floor was scattered with spent casings, empty shells, scorched cloth. Alex sat on the porch rail, gazing north. "She's out of reach by now," he said. "Clara?" Mary asked. He nodded. "They won't catch her." Mary looked toward the black trail of smoke rising from the creek valley. "She's heading for the marshal? That's what we planned." Joan closed her eyes, murmuring, "Then it's up to them now." "No," Alex said, his voice low. "It's still up to us." Mary looked at him. "You mean if they come back?" "I mean when?" The morning after the fire, Alex Rivers packed his rifle, saddled his mare, and rode toward Elgin alone. Smoke still lingered on his coat from the night before, the stink of scorched wood and gunpowder woven into the seams like a second skin. His hands ached, his shoulder bruised from recoil, but his eyes were steady. There was no room left for fear, only follow-through. The ride was slow. Not because he was cautious, he wanted them to see him come. Elgin sat low between two hills, a town built on old timber and older silence. When Alex entered, no bells rang. No doors opened. The street was quiet, too quiet, as if every window held a breath, waiting to see what kind of storm he'd brought with him. He dismounted in front of the First Frontier Bank, the same one that had sold him land under false claims, the same one that had tried to burn the truth alive. The wood creaked beneath his boots as he stepped through the door. The lobby was dim. No clerks, no ledgers, no paper rustling, just the steady hiss of fire. Not wild, not urgent, but careful, controlled. In the back room, the light flickered. Jonathan Kessler stood beside a heavy desk, sleeves rolled, coat draped over the chair. The fire in the stove been burned hot, and in his hands were sheaves of parchment. Deeds, contracts, names, evidence. Each page curled black as he dropped it into the flames. Alex didn't hesitate. "You're wasting matches," he said. Kessler didn't look up. "Mr. Rivers." "You should have run," Alex said, stepping closer. Kessler glanced toward him now, but his face held no surprise. "And leave my bank? My town? It was never yours." Kessler smiled faintly, dropping another paper into the fire. "Ownership, Mr. Rivers, is a matter of record, of recognition, of power." Alex leveled his gaze. "Not anymore." Kessler raised an eyebrow. "Because you brought a handful of dusty papers? Because you hid behind women and got lucky in a fight?" "No," Alex said. "Because Clara reached the marshal." The room went still. Kessler didn't blink, but his hand froze above the fire. "She had everything," Alex said. "Letters, rulings, names. You sold stolen land, falsified tax notices, forged signatures." Kessler finally turned fully, his voice colder now. "You think a girl riding with a bundle of papers is enough to break a machine like this?" "I don't need to break it," Alex said. "Just stop you." There was a long pause. Then, behind Alex, the door opened. Marshal Davidson stepped inside, coat unbuttoned, badge gleaming. 4 federal agents followed. Behind them, dusty and wind-chapped, stood Clara. Alive, whole, eyes burning. "Jonathan Kessler," the marshal said, his voice firm and clear. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, forgery, destruction of federal property, and theft of land from protected citizens under Ruling 76-3A. Kessler didn't resist. Not yet, but his jaw clenched as the agents moved in, their hands on him like stone. Jonathan Kessler didn't fight. He stood still as the marshal's deputies placed cold iron around his wrists and read the charges. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy, destruction of federal evidence, extortion, land theft under protected settler statutes. As they led him through the doors of his own bank, he looked neither proud nor defeated, just distant, as if he'd already begun rewriting the story in his head. But those watching from the windows saw something else. The face of a man who'd gambled too long on silence and lost. Clara followed just behind, windburned and dusty from her ride, but steady. Her presence was no accident. She had insisted on witnessing it, on standing as living proof that the truth had made it through. Her hands were still ink-stained, her boots scuffed from the trail, but her eyes didn't blink. Outside, word spread fast. Brackett was found before noon, holed up in a freight barn south of town. His left leg was soaked in blood, and he tried to bluff his way through the arrest. Claimed he had men nearby, claimed Kessler would free him. But his gun was empty, and his mouth grew quieter as the irons closed. By nightfall, the town had turned. The bank manager, a man named Stillwell, confessed to forging land transfers for bribes. 2 junior clerks admitted to shredding court letters and hiding foreclosure notices. 1 woman, a notary, was caught trying to flee on the northbound stage with a sack full of unregistered deeds. No one tried to stop the marshal's men. No one dared. The evidence was overwhelming. Alex stood beside Clara as crates were pulled from beneath the bank floor. Records of false taxes, duplicate sales, forged contracts, letters threatening families to move or face arrest. Some documents were 20 years old. Others were printed just last month. It was not a mistake. It was not even ordinary greed. It was a system run clean, hidden well, and profiting from the confusion of the frontier. Hundreds of acres had been taken. Dozens of families forced to leave. All under the careful pen of a man who never lifted a weapon, just a fountain pen. Mary stood quietly outside the hearing room, watching names be recorded. Joan brought water to the marshal's men, stopping only to nod at Clara now and then. Alex gave his sworn statement by lamplight. He wrote plainly, like he always had, but when he signed his name, his hand didn't shake. They didn't celebrate. Not yet, but they stood. The arrests continued for 3 days. When it was over, the marshal's men loaded up the wagon, packed the crates of evidence, and turned south toward the capital. The land was safe. The truth had held. Alex Rivers didn't leave. He stayed after the arrests, after the statements were signed, after the marshal's men rolled out with their wagons full of evidence and prisoners. He stayed through the paperwork, the testimony, the silence that followed once the town began to remember how to breathe. The Graysons' land was returned. That was the first ruling to come through, stamped and sealed and posted for all to see. A printed copy now hung by the kitchen door. Clara framed it in cedar from the barn. The next ruling ordered restitution. The $600 Alex had spent on the fake deed was returned to him. Every coin counted out on the same bank counter where Kessler once shook his hand and sold him lies. The clerk who paid him didn't meet his eyes. He took the money, folded it, and placed it in his coat. But he didn't leave. Instead, he walked back to the Grayson farm. 1 slow mile through wind and brush, boots heavy with the memory of fire and gunpowder. He arrived just as the sun was setting behind the new barn. Yes, new. The community had come. Word of the deception spread fast. And when the smoke cleared, it wasn't just sympathy that came knocking. It was wood, nails, hammer swings. A dozen neighbors helped raise new walls. 2 blacksmiths fixed the hinges. A merchant donated fresh paint. No one asked for thanks. Joan was standing by the stall when he came up the trail, a rope in one hand, a young foal shifting at her side. "Took your time," she said, not looking up. "Thought about staying gone," Alex said. "Didn't think hard enough." He smiled. Mary came out from the house. Her hands were dusted with flour, her apron smudged, her hair tied back tight. She looked at him once, nodded, and then turned back inside. Supper was nearly done. Inside the house, Clara was reading by lamplight. Not a ledger, not a law book, just a worn copy of poetry that had belonged to her mother. She looked up when he stepped in and said nothing, but her eyes said everything. Alex set his rifle near the door, hung his coat by the stove, and sat down on the step just outside the porch. The boards creaked beneath him, familiar and clean. The land was quiet. The barn smelled of hay and soap. The chickens murmured in their roost. Wind moved gently through the field where beans had just begun to sprout again. No title sat in his pocket. No claim bore his name. But the land had opened for him anyway. He didn't own it. He belonged to it. 3 months passed. Summer gave way to the first stirrings of autumn. The sky cooled. The light softened. Leaves began to yellow along the edges of the creek, and the wind carried the smell of smoke from hearths instead of battlefields. The Grayson farm had changed. The barn stood straight, newer than the house now, painted the color of red earth. The chickens had returned to their routine. The well had been repaired. The kitchen garden doubled in size. Beans, corn, onions, all pushing through. A new fence circled the property like an arm drawn in protection, post by post. But what changed most was the rhythm. Joan spent her mornings in the east field, training the foal, a strong-limbed, clever-eyed creature that had already bucked 2 farmhands. She didn't mind. She talked to the animal like a person, quiet and calm, and the horse responded in kind. Clara had started teaching letters to the neighbor children. On Saturdays, they came with slates and broken pencils and left with stories, rules of grammar, and sometimes a biscuit. She read aloud at night now, not legal cases but poems. She said them like songs, as if remembering a language older than justice. Mary cooked. She worked. She stitched the roof with her own hands when it leaked. And she smiled more now, not often but truly, as if something inside had finally stopped bracing for the next loss. And Alex Rivers? He stayed. Not because they asked him. Not because they owed him. Because he wanted to. Some mornings, he walked the fence line with a hammer and a handful of nails. Others, he hunted rabbits near the creek or traded for sugar in Elgin. He kept the stove burning in winter and the porch swept in spring. He listened more than he spoke. He no longer dreamed of Missouri or the mine. He slept in the small room off the kitchen. He kept his boots near the door. His name wasn't on the deed. But the land didn't seem to care. He had found something rare. Not peace, but presence. Not silence, but belonging. Sometimes at dusk, they sat together on the porch, all four of them, watching the sun dip below the far line of hills. No one said much. Words weren't always needed. One evening, Mary leaned her shoulder gently against his. "Why'd you stay?" she asked. Alex took a long breath. "Because this place doesn't ask me to be anything more than I am." Mary nodded, looking out toward the barn, toward the fence line where Joan had just disappeared behind the hill. "Funny," she said. "I used to think this place only took things from people." "It did," he answered. "But not anymore." The stars came out one by one. A dog barked in the distance. An owl answered. They didn't go inside for a long time.